Welcome to Check This Out, podcast for kids.
And their grown-ups, where we explore interesting people, places, and ponderings that shape the world around us. My name is Amy Contreras.
And I'm Cece.
Welcome to episode 9. Before we dive in, please make sure you subscribe to our channel so you can be the first to get new episodes of Check This Out, podcast for kids. Episode 9 of Check This Out is all about famous American abolitionist Sojourner Truth and her life in the 1800s. You may not have learned about Sojourner yet in school, but she is a famous American worth knowing. And we like to think of our episodes as little introductions to interesting people, places, and ponderings throughout history.
Well, hello, nice to meet you.
It is indeed time to meet and get to know Sojourner Truth. We are going to switch things up for this episode, and instead of making you wait until the end for our poem, we're going to start with the poem we wrote about Sojourner Truth.
Listeners, keep your ears open.
Because in the poem, and throughout the episode, you're going to get snippets about her life. But don't worry, we'll go deeper and give you a ton of fun facts and opportunities to research 3 additional facts on your own at the end.
We wrote you a poem.
Born in a time of chains, she fought enslavement to be free. Named Isabella Baumfree, her spirit filled with glee. In New York, her journey of speaking and activism began. She escaped with her babe in the night, a courageous woman. Breaking chains, she named herself Sojourner Truth, and she traveled far and wide. For the rights of women and Black people, she stood and spoke with pride. Her voice rose powerful at all the women's rights halls. Ain't I a woman? Rang in the ears of all. From slavery's dark grip to the fight for women's rights, she championed for justice, a true guiding light. The book of her struggle and her speeches changed many minds. Sojourner's legacy, activism and equality for all kind. Sojourner Truth is one of the most powerful advocates for human rights in the 19th century. Let's learn a little bit more about who she was. Sojourner Truth was born an enslaved child in 1797 in Ulster County, New York. Her birth name was Isabella Baumfree. If you've listened to our other episode on Harriet Tubman, you might be confused that she was born into slavery in New York, which is in the northern United States. You might be thinking, Amy and Cece, wasn't slavery only allowed in the South? Just hang on, because I'll explain more about that in a moment. Truth was bought and sold to new masters 4 times during the period that she was enslaved. As a child, she was religious and had visions or heard voices, which she attributed to God. While she was enslaved, she didn't marry, but she did have a partnership with another enslaved person named Thomas, and they had 5 children together. Sojourner escaped enslavement in 1826, which was just a year before the law in New York changed to make slavery illegal. So eventually slavery did become illegal in New York, but it was after Sojourner was already in her late 20s. When she ran to freedom, she brought her infant daughter with her. She escaped and stayed with an abolitionist family who was against slavery. The family who she escaped to ended up being big helpers in her journey to freedom.
How, Mama?
The family bought her freedom for $20 and helped her successfully secure the return of her 5-year-old son, who had been illegally sold into slavery in Alabama.
That was terrible.
Sojourner Truth was the first African American woman to win a lawsuit in the United States when she fought for her son's freedom after he had been illegally sold.
What an amazing story!
Here's another interesting fact about Sojourner's time in enslavement. Her first language actually wasn't English. Do you want to take a guess at what it was? Was it
A,
French,
B,
Dutch,
C,
German? If you guessed B, Dutch, great job. Her first language was Dutch. Her first master when she was a child was a Dutch colonel. After her escape from enslavement, she moved to New York City and got involved in the church. She became a popular religious speaker at church events, and in 1843, she took the name Sojourner Truth. She explained her new name as this. She picked Sojourner because I was to travel up and down the land, showing people their sins and being assigned to them. And Truth because I was to declare the truth unto people.
Check this out.
Sojourner Truth never learned to read or write in her lifetime, but was a popular and well-respected speaker at public events. Part of why this is amazing is that she did have an autobiography published during her life.
What?
She was able to get her book published by dictating it to an author. This means she told her life story to an author who helped her turn it into a book.
That is cool.
Let's see if you can guess what her autobiography was called. Was it
A.
The Narrative of Sojourner Truth?
B.
A Song of Freedom and Truth?
C.
My Life Story? If you guessed A, you're correct. Her autobiography, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, helped her have income in the later parts of her life. It was published in 1850 and helped her gain notoriety and meet women's rights activists, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony.
What does that mean?
During the 1800s and early 1900s, women and women's rights organizations worked to gain the right to vote, which they did not have at the time. But they also worked for economic and political equality and for general social reforms. As an example, between 1880 and 1910, the number of women employed in the United States increased from 2.6 million to 7.8 million, thanks in large part to the advocacy of women's rights groups.
Wow.
During the 1850s, Truth settled in Battle Creek, Michigan, where 3 of her daughters lived. She continued traveling, speaking nationally, and helping enslaved people in the South escape to freedom. Remember, the Civil War happened in the United States from April of 1861 until May of 1865. In 1851, she traveled around on a lecture tour that included a women's rights conference where she delivered her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech. Of all her speeches, this is one of her most famous. Her speech, entitled "Ain't I a Woman?", challenged ideas about racial and gender equality. It highlighted the unique struggles faced by Black women in their fight for equality and rights. Truth's eloquence and personal experiences led significant weight to her advocacy, making her an important figure in both the abolitionist and early feminist movements. Plus, Sojourner Truth was tall. She was almost 6 feet high. This made her a force in any room she entered or spoke in. Sojourner Truth's impact extended beyond her speeches. She was also involved in various social reform movements, including the Campaign for Universal Suffrage, which is the right to vote, and the rights of formerly enslaved individuals, as well as desegregation.
She was a busy lady.
Her dedication to social change earned her recognition as a significant figure in American history. One of the hard challenges that women's rights groups faced as they were fighting for the vote was to figure out which group they were fighting for. Was it all women? Was it white women? Was it Black men or Black women? In other episodes, you've heard me mention that white women gained the right to vote in 1920 with the passing and ratification of the 19th Amendment. But Black women didn't gain the right to vote until 1965. Sojourner was focused on fighting for intersectional rights across race and gender.
What does that mean?
Intersectionality is a big word, and it's a little complicated, but you can think of it like this. Just like a puzzle, each person is made up of lots of different pieces, like their race, gender, physical ability, even their religion. It's impossible to understand the full picture of a person until you put all the pieces together. Intersectionality is the combination of all those different identities that make up the whole individual. So when Sojourner Truth was fighting for universal suffrage, it wasn't just for women, it was for anyone who couldn't vote, which included Black women, Black men, white women, and so on. Like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth played a role in the Civil War. I just reminded you earlier, but do you remember when the Civil War took place? Was it A, from 1860 to 1864, B, from 1861 to 1865, or C, from 1865 to 1869?
Mama, can I guess? I think it's B.
During the Civil War that took place from 1861 to 1865, Sojourner used her travel and speaking platforms to encourage men to join the Union cause in the Civil War. She also organized supplies for Black troops.
She was a busy lady.
In her travels, Sojourner went to Washington, D.C., where she lobbied against segregation. We talked a little about segregation in our episode on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As a quick reminder, all this is happening before the Civil Rights Act, which didn't happen until almost 100 years later. What Sojourner was fighting against was that places like streetcars, schools, and housing developments were segregated into white and colored. In the mid-1860s, a streetcar conductor tried to violently block Sojourner from riding because she was Black. She made sure he got arrested, and she won her case in court. A Black woman winning a court case was highly unusual and spoke to her respect and influence. As a result of her work on desegregation, she was received at the White House by President Abraham Lincoln.
She sounds really brave.
In 1864, Sojourner started work with the National Freedmen's Relief Association, counseling formerly enslaved people. She helped formerly enslaved people settle into life after slavery and supported them in doing things they'd never done before, like find jobs, homes, schools, and to build new lives.
Oh, that's important.
She collected thousands of signatures on a petition to provide formerly enslaved people with land.
Check this out.
Abraham Lincoln wasn't the only president Sojourner Truth had the opportunity to meet. See if you can guess the other president who she met and worked with. Was it A, President Andrew Johnson, B, President James Buchanan, or C, President Ulysses S. Grant?
I think it's C.
C was the right answer. She met Ulysses S. Grant through her work in the 1870s while she advocated to secure land grants from the federal government for formerly enslaved people. Although her efforts failed, she worked on Grant's re-election campaign in 1872. In 1875, she retired to her home in Battle Creek, Michigan, and she stayed there until her death in 1883. Sojourner Truth had a long and impactful life.
Here are 3 of our favorite facts.
Fact number 1. Sojourner Truth won 2 court cases in her life. The first, to bring back her son that was illegally sold into slavery, and the second was against the streetcar driver that tried to block her from riding. Check out more about what that meant, why it was unusual, and how she won. Fact number 2. Sojourner's Ain't I a Woman speech expanded thinking about what women's rights meant and how to include Black and lower income women and women of color into the conversation. Check out the speech and consider which of her ideas were most interesting. Fact number 3. Sojourner met a lot of famous people in her life, including 2 presidents and many famous women's rights activists. Learn about who else Sojourner worked alongside as she advocated for the rights of formerly enslaved people and women.
What was your favorite fact?
At Check This Out, we know it can be hard to know if information you find online is accurate. We use verified sources to build the stories you hear about. The Library of Congress, Encyclopedia Britannica, the National Park Service, womenshistory.org, and history.com.
Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening. See you next episode.